Please. Stop. I can give you everything you want. Her voice was swallowed by thunder as the wheelchair skidded through the mud, inching closer to the edge. That night, the rain didn't just fall, it accused. Eleanor Whitmore, a 75-year-old billionaire confined to a wheelchair, stared into the darkness of the ravine as her daughter-in-law, Claudia Whitmore, pushed her forward with shaking hands and merciless resolve. Claudia's heels sank into the wet earth. Her mascara streaked down her face like proof of a soul unraveling. 20 years of resentment, debt, and envy had led to this moment. Tonight, inheritance mattered more than blood. "There's no more waiting," Claudia hissed. "By morning they'll call it an accident." The wheelchair stopped at the brink. Below, the river roared like a beast ready to erase all evidence. Eleanor begged not for her fortune, but for mercy, for the memory of family, for the life she still clung to. But mercy had already drowned in Claudia's desperation. With one final shove, the brakes released, and the world tipped forward. Metal screamed against stone, branches snapped. Then silence. Claudia stood frozen, chest heaving, listening, until the storm reclaimed the night. Satisfied, she turned away, rehearsing tears for the police, for the town, for the lie she would live so easily. What she didn't know, what arrogance never sees, was that she hadn't been alone. Hidden among the thorny brush stood Amara Johnson, a young black woman with calloused feet, rain-soaked clothes, and eyes that missed nothing. She had seen it all. And as the echo of Eleanor's fall faded into the storm, Amara felt her heart pound. With a truth heavier than fear, evil had acted freely, but goodness was about to answer. And the night was far from over. Amara Johnson did not scream. She did not run. She did not move at all. Rain slid down her face and mixed with the mud on her skin, but her eyes stayed locked on the ravine, wide and unblinking. From where she stood half-hidden behind thorny bushes, she had seen everything. The shove, the fall, the lie that followed as Claudia turned away. Amara's chest tightened, not with shock, but with something heavier knowing. At just 7 years old, Amara had already learned how to survive quietly. Hunger had taught her that noise wasted energy. Loss had taught her that tears changed nothing. 3 years earlier, the river had taken her parents during a flood, stealing not only their lives, but her voice as well. Since that night, no sound had ever left her throat. Words lived inside her, trapped, watching, just like she was now. People in the nearby village called her the silent girl from the hills. Some pitied her. Others avoided her. No one noticed when she slipped into the forest barefoot to check rabbit traps in the rain, because hunger didn't pause for storms. And no one would notice now if she disappeared. That thought came to her quickly, sharp and logical. Run, hide, forget. The woman who pushed the wheelchair was dangerous, powerful, rich. Amara was none of those things. She was small, soaked to the bone, trembling from cold. If she slipped near the edge, no one would come looking. Fear wrapped around her ribs and squeezed. Then she heard it. At first, she thought it was thunder echoing through the ravine. But her life had trained her ears to listen closely. This sound was different, fragile, broken. A faint, trembling moan rising from somewhere below, not from the river, but from the cliff itself. Amara's breath caught. Her fingers dug into the wet earth as she crawled closer to the edge, every instinct screaming that this was how people died. Lightning split the sky, and for a heartbeat, the darkness lifted. That was when she saw her. Eleanor Whitmore was alive, suspended against the cliff, tangled in the twisted branches of an old, stubborn tree. The elderly woman clung to life with bloodied hands. The wheelchair was gone, swallowed by the ravine, but Eleanor remained hanging between earth and death, eyes wild with terror. Their gazes met. One woman had owned everything. The other had nothing at all. Eleanor's lips moved in a silent plea. Amara understood without words. She felt the weight of the moment press down on her small body, heavier than hunger, heavier than fear. She knew she should leave. She knew the storm could kill her. She knew the world had never protected girls like her. But Amara also knew something else, something Claudia Whitmore never had. She could not walk away from someone else's pain. As the rain beat harder against her back, Amara Johnson made a choice that would change both their lives forever. Amara Johnson's hands shook as she scanned the ground around her, her breath coming in short, silent bursts. The storm pressed in from every side, rain lashing her back like cold whips, but she barely felt it. All she could see was Eleanor hanging there, arms trembling, fingers slipping on soaked bark. Time was running out. Even Amara, young as she was, understood that bodies gave up before hope did. She slid the rough coil of rope from her waist, the same frayed line she used to tie bundles of firewood for her grandfather. It was old, stiff with dirt, and smelled of smoke and rain. She tested it once, twice, pulling hard with both hands until her shoulders burned. It held. It would have to. Amara crawled on her belly toward a thick, knotted root jutting from the earth like a clenched fist. Mud filled her mouth. Stones scraped her knees raw. One slip, and she would follow Eleanor into the dark. The thought flickered through her mind, sharp and cold, but it did not stop her. She looped the rope around the root and tied the tightest knot she knew, fingers, clumsy skin splitting as the fibers bit into her palms. She tugged again, bracing her heels into the ground. The root didn't move. Lightning flashed. Eleanor cried out as the tree beneath her groaned, a long, cracking sound that echoed through the ravine. Her strength was fading. Amara saw it in the way Eleanor's elbows buckled, the way her head sagged forward as if sleep were pulling her under. No, Amara thought fiercely, not tonight. She leaned over the edge and hurled the rope downward. It struck Eleanor's shoulder and slid wet and heavy. Eleanor gasped, eyes widening as she looked up into the storm and saw the small figure above her. "You can't," she shouted hoarsely. "You're too little. Go get help." Amara shook her head so hard it hurt. There was no help. There was only now. She dropped flat to the ground, anchoring the rope around her waist the way she'd seen grown men do when hauling wood uphill. Then she gestured sharp, urgent movements with her hands. "Under your arms. Tie it." Eleanor's hands trembled violently as she obeyed. She fumbled, nearly losing her grip on the branch entirely. When the knot finally cinched tight around her torso, she screamed, "I'm ready!" Amara planted her bare feet into the mud and pulled. Pain exploded through her body. The rope burned her skin. Her spine screamed under the weight. Eleanor was far heavier than anything Amara had ever moved, heavier than firewood, heavier than hunger. Amara slid forward inches at a time, the edge of the ravine threatening to swallow her whole. She pulled again and again. Her muscles shook uncontrollably. Tears streamed down her face, lost in the rain. She wanted to stop. She wanted to curl into the mud and let the storm take the choice away. But then she saw Eleanor's hands, bloody torn, still holding on. She remembered her parents' faces in the flood the moment she'd been too small, too weak to help. Not again, she thought. Not this time. With a desperate cry trapped in her chest, Amara wrapped the rope around the tree trunk to create leverage. She leaned back with every ounce of her weight, using her whole body as a counterbalance. The rope creaked. The tree groaned. Then movement. Eleanor rose. Just a little. Then more. Inch by agonizing inch, she was pulled upward, scraping against rock and bark, until at last her hand appeared over the edge. Amara lunged forward, grabbing Eleanor's wrist with both hands. Their skins met soft and cold against rough and bleeding. Together they collapsed onto the grass, gasping, shaking, alive. The storm raged on, but for a moment it felt like the world had stopped, awed by what a small, silent girl had just done. The ground felt unreal beneath Amara Johnson's body. Too solid, too quiet after the violence of the ravine. She lay on her back, chest heaving, rain pouring straight into her open mouth, as if the sky itself were trying to fill the emptiness inside her. Every muscle burned. Her hands throbbed so fiercely she could barely curl her fingers. Still, she did not move. If she did, she feared the strength holding her together would vanish. Beside her, Eleanor Whitmore coughed violently, her body folding in on itself, as shock finally claimed its due. Each breath rattled thin and fragile like glass about to shatter. The grass beneath her was slick and cold, her silk dress torn and soaked through, clinging uselessly to her skin. She was alive, miraculously so, but life was slipping fast in the storm. Eleanor turned her head, vision blurring, and saw Amara lying there, impossibly small against the open sky. The girl's arms were streaked with blood where the rope had burned her raw. Her feet were bare, caked in mud. And yet she had pulled a grown woman back from death. "Child," Eleanor whispered, her voice barely surviving the rain. "You saved me." Amara didn't answer. She couldn't. Instead, she pushed herself upright on trembling elbows, biting back a whimper as pain shot through her wrists. She crawled closer and wrapped her thin arms around her own body, shaking violently now that the adrenaline was gone. Cold had sunk deep into her bones, sharp and merciless. Eleanor recognized the signs too late. Hypothermia. The storm that hadn't killed her fall might finish the rest. Don't stay here," Eleanor said weakly. "If she comes back, if Claudia comes back, leave me. Please." Amara's head snapped up. Her dark eyes flashed with fierce refusal. She shook her head once. No. Never. She stood unsteadily and reached for Eleanor's arms, lifting them with surprising authority and draping them around her own narrow shoulders. Her knees nearly buckled under the weight. Eleanor tried to protest. "You can't carry me, I'll crush you." Amara didn't argue. She simply turned, braced herself, and began to move. She couldn't lift Eleanor fully, not even close. Instead, she dragged her inch by inch through the wet grass and into the trees. Amara moved on hands and knees, pulling with her shoulders, her back screaming with every motion. Branches tore at her skin. Stones bruised her knees. But she didn't stop. The forest swallowed them quickly, branches closing in like protective arms. The path disappeared. So did the world Eleanor had known money power names that once opened every door. None of it mattered here. Only warmth. Only shelter. At last, Amara found it a shallow hollow between two massive rocks, a crude den used by animals to escape the rain. Dry. Shielded. Safe enough. She eased Eleanor inside and collapsed beside her breath, shuddering. Eleanor's teeth were chattering violently now, her skin pale lips tinged blue. Panic clawed at Amara's chest. She forced herself up again and moved fast, driven by instinct, sharpened by years of surviving without help. She returned with handfuls of dry moss broad leaves and crushed wild herbs. Kneeling close, Amara peeled off her own soaked jacket and wrapped it around Eleanor's shoulders, then pressed moss against her skin for insulation. Her hands moved with care, far beyond her age, gentle and steady. Eleanor watched through tears as the girl worked in silence, each movement an act of pure devotion. No payment. No promise. Just compassion. In the darkness of that forest shelter, as the storm raged on outside, something inside, Eleanor Whitmore broke open, not from fear this time, but from truth. She had been saved not by power, not by wealth, but by the strength of a child the world had never bothered to see. Eleanor Whitmore drifted in and out of consciousness as the storm slowly loosened its grip on the forest. Each time her eyes opened, the world looked different. Smaller, quieter, stripped of the sharp edges she had once commanded with a single phone call. The cave smelled of damp earth and crushed leaves. Her body ached in places she had never known pain could reach. Yet beneath the pain was something else. Shame. She turned her head slightly and saw Amara Johnson, curled beside her knees, drawn to her chest, arms wrapped tightly around herself. The girl's hands were raw and blistered, the skin split and swollen from the rope. Mud still clung beneath her fingernails. She was asleep now, or perhaps simply too exhausted to move her breathing shallow but steady. Eleanor's throat tightened. In the dim light filtering through the rocks, memory rose uninvited and merciless. 2 years ago, a group of laborers had stood at the gates of her estate, hats in hand, rain-stained boots on polished stone. They had asked for permission to gather fallen wood near the far edge of her land, nothing more. She had barely looked at them. Her gaze had slid past the men and landed briefly on a thin black girl clinging to an older man's leg. Silent. Watchful. Dirty, she had thought. Out of place. She had waved them away with irritation. "This is private property," she had said. "You're ruining the view." Now the view was gone. The gates, the house, the fortune that once made her untouchable. And the child. Eleanor's eyes filled as she looked at Amara again, recognition crashing into her like a second fall. This is her, the girl from the gates, the one she had dismissed as nothing more than an inconvenience. Yet here she was, this child she had pushed out of her world, pulling her back into it with bleeding hands and silent courage. "I'm sorry," Eleanor whispered into the darkness, the words breaking apart as they left her lips. "I didn't see you." Amara stirred slightly but did not wake. Eleanor let the truth settle deep in her chest, heavy and irreversible. All her life, she had believed strength came from control, from distance, from never needing anyone. She had built walls so high that even compassion had learned not to knock. And now those walls lay in ruins, dismantled not by enemies or rivals, but by a girl who owned nothing and still gave everything. For the first time in decades, Eleanor felt small. Not weak, but humbled. Morning crept slowly into the forest, pale and tentative. Eleanor watched the light touch Amara's face, revealing the exhaustion carved into features far too young to carry such weight. She reached out with trembling fingers and gently covered the girl's wounded hands with her own. A vow formed in Eleanor's mind, not loud, not dramatic, but unshakable. If she lived through this, if she ever stood again in the world she once ruled, things would change. She would not return to the woman who had measured worth by wealth and silence. She would not forget the girl who had chosen compassion over fear, action over survival. Amara Johnson had saved her life, and Eleanor Whitmore would spend the rest of hers trying to become worthy of that miracle. The forest was quiet now. Not silent in the way death feels, but alive with small sounds, dripping leaves, distant birds, testing the morning air. Amara Johnson sat beside Eleanor Whitmore. Her knees pulled close, her injured hands wrapped in leaves and cloth torn from Eleanor's dress. Pain pulsed through her fingers with every heartbeat, yet she did not complain. She never had. Eleanor watched him with a mixture of awe and sorrow. The girl had every reason to walk away. She was poor, alone, invisible to the world. And yet when faced with another human being's suffering, Amara had chosen compassion over safety, courage over fear. She had stayed. Slowly, Eleanor reached for Amara's hand again. Not as a billionaire, not as a woman of power, but as a human being asking for forgiveness without words. Amara looked up surprised. Their eyes met. No anger lived there. No accusation. Only quiet strength. Eleanor's voice trembled. "You should have left me," she said. "Anyone would have." Amara shook her head gently. Then, for the first time since the night her parents were taken by the river, she did something unexpected. She placed her hand over her heart, then pointed to Eleanor. People don't leave people to die. That was the truth she lived by. When help finally came hours later, guided by Eleanor's fading strength and Amara's unwavering resolve, the story would spread about the fall, the betrayal, the miracle. But no headline would ever fully capture what happened in that forest. Because the real miracle was not survival. It was transformation. Eleanor left that ravine a different woman. Stripped of illusion. Awake. She would later testify against Claudia, yes, but more importantly, she would change the life she returned to. Gates once closed were opened. Land once guarded was shared. And Amara Johnson, the girl she once dismissed, was no longer invisible. But Amara never called herself a hero. She simply did what her heart demanded. This story reminds us of a truth the world often forgets. True greatness is not measured by wealth, power, or status, but by what we choose to do when no one is watching. The smallest voices can carry the greatest courage, and sometimes the people society overlooks are the very ones who restore our faith in humanity. What would you have done if you were Amara? Do you believe kindness can still change the world today? Share your thoughts in the comments. We read every one. If this story moved you, like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss another story that reminds us who we are meant to be. Because compassion is not weakness. It is the bravest choice of all.